What Jasmine Crockett does here is more than defend herself. She pulls back the curtain on something many Americans sense but rarely hear stated this plainly: how power, rhetoric, and selective enforcement can quietly turn law enforcement into a political weapon.
Thank the chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Jasmine Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I first just want to begin with a news alert. Guess what? Joe Biden is not the president anymore. So maybe we can move on. Maybe we can move into the present, because it seems like we are living in the past. And listen, these are not the good old days, you know, like you used to sit around and your grandparents would talk to you about what used to happen. What we need to be talking about is how we are going to legislate, because I think that some of my colleagues have confused what our jobs are. And I get that we're sitting in judiciary. And so it may seem as if we are here to be litigators, but we are here to be legislators, which means that we are supposed to be writing laws, not trying to have our own trials and determine whether or not something is true or not, or whatever the case is, or who should be sued, who shouldn't be sued. All I know is that a great American hero, a good senator out of New Jersey, said something to the effect yesterday as he was shattering the record for holding the floor, a record that had been held by another racist in this country. As he shattered that, he said something about the fact that this should not be about left versus right. It should be about right versus wrong. And I am going to tell you that I want us to focus on right versus wrong. The reason that we are struggling right now in this country as it relates to people not trusting agencies, honestly, a lot of it is because of elected leaders. Let me tell you, one of the things that the chairman and I actually agree upon, we don't agree on a lot, is that we both know that there has been a sharp incline as it relates to threats upon our lives. Regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, we both know and agree that as sitting members of Congress, we both are enduring more death threats than anybody should in this country. And I believe that it is because of the divisive rhetoric, and it is because of the selective enforcement of things. And so when we have, and I'm gonna be clear, because I had remarks and I'm going a whole other way. To have the sitting Attorney General go on, and I'm gonna call it faux news. I know some of y'all love it, but it's fake to me. To have her go on Fox News and to then decide that she wanted to send a threat to me, it was wrong. Because here it is, she is the highest law enforcement agent in this country, and people are watching and they are consuming this information, and they are believing that simply because I decided that I wanted to exercise my right to free speech, which I am not abridged from doing, that she then wanted to then politicize something that should not be politicized. I don't like Elon Musk. I'm gonna say it 50,000 times. I don't like him. I don't like that he going out there and he firing people. I think that he's a crook, because somehow the rest of us can't sit around and get whatever federal contracts we want. The rest of us can't sit around and get law enforcement and get them somehow ordained as federal law enforcement to protect him. The rest of us can't get our dealerships protected by the federal government. That is somebody that is operating above the law. For whatever reason, just because he has a lot of money, more money than everybody else. And yes, I am happy to see that on my birthday, which is what I said, there were peaceful protests around this world against him, because he is a problem. And so you never should have somebody that is sitting that high and is going to sit up here and threaten a sitting member of Congress when she knew good and well, if she watched the entire thing, that I specifically told protesters to make sure you consult with lawyers, just like I've told protesters over and over and over in the history of me advising people to go out and exercise their constitutional right. The fact that there are other sitting members that have received letters of threat from this new DOJ tells me that they are about retribution and they are not about following the law. The reason that our party, or I won't even say our party, our country is torn apart is because we can't even agree on right versus wrong. This should not be left versus right. The only thing that we're asking is that we have law enforcement that will show up when there is an actual crime. If somebody calls and says, hey, I need you to investigate this cyber crime, or I need you to investigate this child pornography, or I need you to investigate this robbery, then we want somebody to show up, and we don't want them to look at us and act as if just because I'm black or because I'm woman, that I am not worthy of having that case investigated, because we have an administration that is continuously railing against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we don't need people that show up that feel like diversity should not be valued. That is why we should have somebody that may show up and looks like me. The final thing that I'll say, because you've been gracious, is this. When I first became a public defender, I had no criminal defense experience. And I walked in and I told my boss, Charlie, I said, listen, you should hire me. He said, why? I said, because I'm black. Charlie looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, let me tell you something. When I walk in, I'm going to walk in with a level of rapport and understanding that maybe some of my other colleagues will not. Charlie offered me my job, and I worked my butt off, and I worked really, really hard for all of my clients, not just those that look like me, and that is what it looks like to serve. Thank you.
She opens by grounding the room in reality. Joe Biden is not the president anymore. That line isn't about partisanship. It's about relevance. Crockett is calling out a pattern where hearings meant to shape future law are instead used to relitigate the past. Legislators aren't prosecutors. They aren't judges. Their job is to write laws that govern the present and protect the future. When hearings become political theater, trust erodes, not just in Congress, but in the institutions Congress oversees. Then she reframes the moment with a moral lens rather than a political one. Not left versus right versus wrong. That distinction matters because democracies don't fail when people disagree. They fail when disagreement becomes justification for abuse of power. Crockett acknowledges something that rarely gets said out loud on Capitol Hill. Threats against members of Congress are rising across the board. This isn't hypothetical, it's lived reality. Members on both sides of the aisle are dealing with death threats at levels that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. And she identifies the accelerant, divisive rhetoric combined with selective enforcement. When leaders speak irresponsibly, someone always takes it further. That's where her confrontation with Attorney General Pam Bondi comes in. Crockett doesn't mince words. She accuses the sitting Attorney General, the highest law enforcement official in the country, of crossing a line by going on Fox News and effectively issuing what she describes as a threat against a sitting member of Congress. That allegation isn't about hurt feelings, it's about power imbalance. When the Attorney General speaks on national television, it isn't just commentary, it carries the implied weight of prosecution, investigation, and enforcement. Viewers don't hear it as opinion, they hear it as authority. And Crockett argues that Bondi used that authority to politicize Crockett's protected speech. Crockett is clear about what she said and what she didn't say. She openly criticizes Elon Musk. She doesn't hide it. She says she dislikes his behavior, his influence, and what she sees as preferential treatment, federal contracts, federal protection, and insulation from consequences that ordinary Americans don't get. That criticism, however sharp, is still speech, and speech is not a crime. She points out something crucial that often gets lost in sound bites. She explicitly told protesters to consult lawyers and to exercise their rights lawfully. That detail matters, because if you remove it, you can construct a narrative of incitement. If you include it, the narrative collapses. This is where her warning becomes bigger than her own case. She says she's not alone. Other Democratic members have received similar letters from this DOJ. That signals a pattern, not an isolated misunderstanding, and patterns are what oversight exists to stop. Crockett's concern is not that law enforcement enforces the law. Her concern is that it enforces it selectively, loudly against critics, quietly for allies. That's how public trust breaks. People stop believing the law is neutral. They stop believing it protects everyone equally.
She connects this directly to lived experience. When law enforcement shows up or doesn't, people already marginalized feel it first. When investigations are ignored, delayed, or dismissed, communities notice. When rhetoric attacks diversity itself, it sends a signal about whose complaints matter and whose don't. Her final story brings the entire argument down to a human level. She talks about becoming a public defender with no formal criminal defense experience. She tells her boss the uncomfortable truth that her identity gave her a kind of credibility and rapport with clients who had learned not to trust the system. That wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. And she didn't use it to serve only people who looked like her, she used it to serve everyone. That story isn't about diversity slogans. It's about effectiveness. It's about understanding. It's about trust. And that's the through line of this entire exchange. When law enforcement is perceived as political, trust collapses. When speech is treated as threat, but power is treated as immunity, legitimacy erodes. And when the highest officials blur the line between criticism and criminality, everyone becomes less safe, including the people in power. This wasn't just Jasmine Crockett venting. It was a warning about what happens when right versus wrong gets replaced by loyalty versus opposition. If this helped you understand why this moment matters, share it and tell us in the comments. Should the Attorney General ever publicly single out members of Congress for their political speech? Or does that cross a line that threatens free expression itself?